Welcome to Distress to Joyful, Bailey's Way. I'm your host, Bailey Raber, here to enlighten you and the rest of the world about one of the most misunderstood mental disorders out there, bipolar disorder. Each week, we're going to learn more about my personal journey with the disorder while leaving you enriched with new information on how you can help better yourself as well as those around you. It's a party and we're underage. Some of you may recognize that as the tune to Party in the USA by Miley Cyrus. That's one of her songs that she did before she went off the wall. And speaking of going off the wall, this week's episode is about the unfortunate down spiral that continues on. So if you remember from last week, I went a little boy crazy and started getting involved sexually with some dudes that I had no interest in settling down with. Well, some other not so proud moments spurred on from that. Let's talk about my debut on the party scene. So I grew up in a small town, and to clarify, my hometown had a population of less than 27,000 at the time. It's not the smallest town in Texas, but it is nothing compared to the massive size of Space City, Texas, aka Houston, that I now reside in. So, what's there to do in a small town? Glad you asked. Absolutely nothing. Okay, well, there are a few things, like loitering around the infamous, I could not say that word right, loitering around the Brazos Mall, or going to the movie theater for the umpteenth time to rewatch the same movie again because options were limited. Or you could go bowling with your friends at the smoke-filled Bowl, Texas, until that tragically burned down in 2012. But let's be real here. There's only so much to do, and you can only do these same activities so many times before it gets extremely old. So, more often than not, us kids that live there were bored out of our minds. And what do kids do when they're bored? They go looking for trouble. Okay, well, not all kids do this, but I definitely did. Remember from last episode how I mentioned that sneaking around to have sex with dude gave me an added adrenaline rush? Well, there are more ways than that to get the adrenaline going, and I was about to discover as many as I could, which is where underage drinking comes into play. I can't exactly remember when I had my first drink, but I do know it was sometime towards the end of sophomore year or the summer before junior year, somewhere in that little mesh. But I was definitely 16 at the time, I know that for sure. I didn't dabble with it too much at first, but once winter break came around during junior year, I started going much, much harder with it. And y'all, my parents were crazy strict. I think I've talked about this before, but my curfew was 10 p.m. even after I graduated high school. That's one of the main reasons why I moved out of their house at such a young age. Anyways, since high school parties didn't tend to start until after 10 p.m., I devised a simple plan on how to get away with going. I would stay the night with a friend that I planned on attending the party with. Easy, right? But that would quickly morph into something much bigger. We'll cover that in a bit. Let's first talk about the party scene. So just about every single party I went to was hosted by a dude, either at his house or at a second home that his family owned. I went to school with some pretty wealthy families, y'all. And if I had to guess, it's much easier for dudes to get away with throwing parties than for girls because of two reasons. One, guys seem to be more trusted by their parents because they can't come home pregnant like a sister. And two, oftentimes the dude who was hosting the party was actually given permission to do so by his parents. I don't know of any girls who had permission like that, but there were plenty of guys who got that kind of permission. And what's even crazier, guys, is that the parents were sometimes home in another room drinking while we were there drinking. And I didn't really think about it back then, but Y'all, that is absolutely batshit crazy. I thought it was cool because, my parents have never allowed anything like that. But being a 26-year-old, having gone through all the things I went through now, I'm just like, why would people allow that? It's crazy. And I mean, I get it. Sorta. I mean, they're likely doing it because they'd rather give their kids a safe place to drink so that they won't go elsewhere and possibly drink and drive, among other dangerous while intoxicated activities. But I still don't condone that whatsoever. And in my opinion, it just seems really absurd. Another point that I want to make was that I wasn't popular. I mean, you probably get that now if you've listened to all of the episodes up until today's. I wasn't a cool kid and I didn't get invited to these parties. The friends that I started hanging out with were the ones who got invited. I just tagged along. Which, being the extreme extrovert that I am, and also genuinely interested in meeting new people, it wasn't really weird to me back then that I just tagged along all the time. But now that I'm sitting here processing things, what was weird about it was that I often had an idea of who the person was that was throwing the party, as well as who was going to be there, but these people all had no idea that I existed. And to give you a good visual of what that was actually like, just think back to any movie you've watched about high school kids when the nerd gets invited to a party, or they just decide to show up to one without an invite, and she walks up to people to talk to them, and they're like, "And who are you?" Well, that's pretty much what it was like for me starting out. Actually, it was like that for a good while. Whenever I did meet people there, they were often drunk or high or both. So the second time I met them, they usually didn't remember the first time, and it was this stupid ass cycle that took a good while to break. Kind of like the storyline of 50 First Dates, except I wasn't dating these people. I was re-meeting them at parties when they were too drunk to even remember. Yeah, fucking wild. But I, just like most teens, was so desperate to fit in and be cool that I was willing to do just about anything to obtain that. So something else I need to point out is that while some of these parties were sanctioned by parents, the majority of them were not. Which means I'm sure you're now wondering, how the hell did these kids get alcohol? And the answer is quite simple, yet also very disturbing. We'd get it from 21-year-olds who spent their free time hanging out with high school kids. Yeah, it's actually really disgusting to think about, especially considering the fact that almost all of them were dudes and were likely doing so because the alcohol they were providing would end up in the hands of high school girls. I'm sure you can put two and two together on that one. But originally, I didn't know any of these older dudes, so I just mooched off what my friends got, or I pitched in to help them pay for what they wanted so we could share. I didn't know jack shit about alcohol. I just knew I wanted to get drunk. And I'm not even sure why I wanted that in the first place. But y'all, getting drunk really isn't that great. That's why I've pretty much stopped drinking alcohol altogether. I honestly can't even remember the last time I was drunk, and I'm gonna keep it that way for ever, I guess. But I mean, the friends that I made back then in order to have people to go party with weren't exactly what I would call real friends. Especially if I compare them to the people that I have in my life now. And I was still extremely boy crazy at the time, so you might be able to imagine what happened next. Well, I'm going to go ahead and just tell you so there's no need to sit there and keep pondering. Alright, so I realized that the easiest way for me to continue my party days was to get involved with one of these older dudes who could supply me with alcohol, as well as a place to stay overnight after the party. Sounds like a win-win, right? Because at the time, it definitely was for me. Oh, plus I totally forgot to mention that my parents never once met any of my partying friends. And this is where shit gets wild. Remember how I mentioned that my parents were super strict? Well, I always had to ask them if it was okay if I stayed the night with a friend before I got to do so. And thankfully, to my advantage, they never asked to get in contact with the girl that I said I would stay the night with, nor did they ever try to contact her parents. So I had 3 to 4 friends that my parents had met previously, and I just rotated them out as cover-ups for where I actually was. Yep, you heard that correctly. I lied to them. And I feel really awful about it, but the past is the past, and I can't undo what's already been done. Instead, I can learn from my mistakes and hopefully teach others to also learn from my mistakes. Alright, so this is where my win-win situation comes into play. Allow me to explain how. So, the friends that I would meet up with to attend these parties with had parents that allowed them to stay out until whenever the fuck they wanted. Sounds super cool, right? Especially when you're only 16. Yeah, I was totally jealous. But here's the shitty part. Well, okay, it was the shitty part for me, anyways. They got to stay out until whenever they wanted, but then they never invited me to come over and stay the night with them after the party. Okay, actually, I did have one friend who let me stay the night with her, and she was a blessing in disguise to my life, and to this day, I doubt she knows that. But the others had no interest in looking out for me, so when the party was winding down, they'd all head home, and I'd be stuck. So, I was left with 2 options. Either sleep in my car, or find someone who would let me sleep in their bed. And the latter meant that I'd likely have to engage in a little more than just sleeping. So what I learned is that if I could get to know one of the older dudes who was supplying the alcohol, I would not only have a source for the alcohol that I wanted, but I'd also have somewhere to sleep after the party was over. And y'all, just remember, I was 16, maybe 17 when all of this started, and I am so thankful that nothing really terrible happened to me, because I learned recently that a lot of these people that I used to hang around with at this time are now addicted to meth, are in prison, or sometimes both. And guys, that could have been me. And that's really scary to think. Also, go back to where I noted that I had 2 options. The first was to sleep in my car. Guys, I can't even tell you how many times I would leave a party because it was winding down and everybody was like, all right, time to go home or whatever. And I wouldn't have a place to go. I wouldn't have a friend invite me to stay with them. So I would literally sleep in my car. Yeah, I know your eyes are probably really wide and you're really shocked right now. And like everybody who's listening who knows me personally, it's okay. Don't freak out. I'm alive. It's fine. I lived. But if I could go back, I would never do that again. I mean, think about how dangerous that is. A 16, 17, 18-year-old, whatever age I was in all those couple years I did this, asleep in a car, on the side of the road, in a parking lot. I mean, I remember there was one park I would usually go to where I would just, park my car there and sleep there because it was dark, it was out of the way, and I could usually be fine there until morning. And then when morning came, I would wake up, I would go get breakfast and just drive around until it was a safe hour for me to show back up at my house after staying the night with whatever friend I was with at the time. Or, excuse me, whatever friend that my parents thought I was with at the time. But there was a couple times when I would park my car on the side of the road outside of houses and just sleep there. Y'all, that is stupid and dangerous, and I cannot believe that I'm sitting here remembering and admitting that I did that. Well, okay, I can believe that I remembered it. I mean, duh. But, it just blows my mind that I actually did that, and it should blow yours too, because that's not something that should be occurring. And anyone who's out there who's younger, who's listening to me right now, please do not, whatever you do not sleep in your car because you have nowhere else to stay. Do not lie to your parents. Don't go out of your way to find shitty things to do, like drinking with people you don't know, dangerous activities. Gosh. And more importantly, don't ever put yourself in a situation where you're stuck. If you can avoid that, which most situations where you would be stuck like this, like, or at least like how I was in these situations, are very easily avoided. If you can avoid that, please, whatever you do, at all costs, avoid it. It's not worth it. And I'm very thankful that nothing bad ever happened to me all of those nights when I slept in my car by myself. Not to mention, guys, that my cars have never had tinted windows. So if I'm sleeping in my car, if anybody were to walk up and see that, they could, like, point blank see me right there, because there's nothing shaded. It's completely see-through glass. They could see me laying there asleep by myself. Please call somebody if you need somewhere to go, but don't do what I did. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about why underage drinking is dangerous, but more specifically, why it is super dangerous for anyone struggling with bipolar disorder or any other mental health issue for that matter. As stated by Dr. Marissa M. Silvari, which I hope I pronounced right, the director of neurodevelopmental, oh, that was a mouthful, Laboratory on Addictions and Mental Health at McLean Hospital. She says, during the teenage and early adult years, the brain is still developing, making it more vulnerable to alcohol than the adult brain. Moreover, research indicates that the earlier a person starts drinking, the more likely that person will develop serious problems with alcohol or drug addiction later on in life. And I'm just going to stop for just a second to make you aware, in case you didn't know, that the CDC classifies alcohol as a drug as it has addictive properties. So I have the link to this article that I just quoted from in the show notes on my blog. That is What is Hay Bales, spelled HEYBAILS, doing.wordpress.com. Eventually the WordPress part will be taken out, but just bear with me for the time being. But in the show notes on my blog, I have the link to this article if you want to read more. The gist of it in total is just that alcohol not only causes serious brain damage while consumed as a teenager, but starting drinking alcohol at a young age has a higher risk of alcohol abuse as an adult. Also, not related to the brain-damaging substance abuse issues, I chuckled out loud as I read, Our understanding of the developing brain tells us that teens likely seek out risky experiences like binge drinking because they are wired for novelty seeking. And that is literally why I got involved with alcohol in the first place. The fact that that was just so spot on, like, I was reading this article and was literally laughing out loud while reading that exact sentence. And I hope you did too. Or you weren't reading it, you heard me read it, say whatever. I hope you laughed, because it's absolutely true. That's why we do it, because we are seeking novelty experiences. Another reason for early use of alcohol and the dangers behind it is that those of us who have bipolar disorder or just any mental health issues that we're struggling with in general, we have a higher risk of developing substance dependence and abuse due to the sometimes instability of our mental health. We often use alcohol as a numbing device in order to cope and deal with depression, although because alcohol is a natural depressant, it creates a vicious cycle. And once the cycle starts, it is so fucking hard to break. So while drinking alcohol typically starts out as a social habit, it has the possibility to turn into something dangerous over time. And trust me from experience on that, you'll learn more later on throughout future episodes, but there came a point in my life when I realized that I was basically an alcoholic. And all of that started because, yep, you guessed it, everything that happened that I went over at the beginning of this episode. Drinking starting at a young age. So for anyone currently struggling with their own mental health, I highly encourage a couple things. So the first one is that if you've never had a drink before, don't do it. Gosh, I really wish I had never picked up that first beer, because I just see a literal, it's not even a downward spiral. It's like domino effect, dude. Like, a line of dominoes and then you just knock one over and then they all knock over. Well, it's like, picking up the beer and then the first beer I ever had, I picked that up and then something bad happened, and that's a domino falling. And then another one. And then another bad thing and another bad thing. And it just literally all the dominoes just started falling, and it didn't create a cool little design that was on the floor like you might have seen in the 90s on TV. But instead it just created a massive shitstorm pile of struggle dominoes everywhere. That's what I'm going to call them, struggle dominoes. Because every one that fell was just a little struggle. And it was not fun. And cleaning up that mess was even more not fun than having to be in the middle of that mess. So as you can see, alcohol caused a lot of problems. But another thing I'm going to recommend is that if you are struggling with mental health and you already use drinking as a coping mechanism, which, no judgment, I did that myself for years, but I want to encourage you to find a healthier habit to replace it with. But please don't go at this alone. Find yourself a trustworthy friend to hold you accountable, and remember that last piece is key. Accountability partners are key anytime you are trying to make a change in your life. So now I'm sure you're wondering, what can you replace drinking with? And since I knew you were going to ask that question, I am armed with some examples. So, if you're feeling sad, stressed, angry, anxious, whatever feeling you're feeling that is not a good feeling, and you have the urge to drink, instead, try one of these few things. Call that accountability partner that you have and talk to them about how you're feeling. Or you could grab a journal and write it all out. Or even better, get up and get your body moving. Y'all, exercise gives you endorphins. Endorphins make you happy. And happy people just don't drink their sorrows away. They just don't. I may have tweaked Elle Woods' speech there a little bit from Legally Blonde, but you get the point. So go for a walk or a jog, or if you're like me and you're crazy, go for a run, or play some upbeat music that your body just can't help but move to, or find a soothing yoga video, or an in-person yoga class if it's safe to do so where you live, or in the event you're listening to this podcast after the 2020 global pandemic. If you're into painting, you can grab a paintbrush and paint on the canvas that you've recently been working on. Or if you're a knitter, keep working on that scarf you were knitting. These are just a few examples of things that you can replace drinking with in order to curb the craving. Personally, I did the running thing a whole lot. That's why I said if you're crazy like me, go for a run. Because I've learned there are two types of people in this world. People who run and people who don't. And the ones who don't find us who do run pretty crazy. So, I would often, anytime I just felt like drinking, I would put on my running shoes and go for a run. Other times I would call a friend, or I would grab whatever sewing project I was working on. Like, those are things that I legitimately did in order to keep myself from going for a drink when I knew I didn't need it. And think about it, y'all. I mean, you spend all day trying to keep yourself hydrated. You drink coffee, so you got to drink like 7 cups of water to rehydrate yourself after that 1 cup of coffee. And then you turn around, and later that evening, when you're finally all hydrated again, you get off work, you're stressed out, you go home, and you start drinking alcohol, which then dehydrates you all over again. I mean, alcohol has absolutely no benefits to your mind or your body. And I actually used that thought process right there as a reason not to drink it. So when I was working towards my weight loss and getting healthy, my thoughts were, is this food, this drink, this snack, whatever it is that I'm about to consume, is it going to nourish my body or is it not? And guys, that's how I got myself to stop eating cookies and candy. That sounds crazy, but if you think about what you're putting in your mouth before you do, then you are less likely to consume things that are of no value to you. Think of alcohol like that. I promise it'll help. It might take some time, but just keep on doing it. Take it one day at a time, and you can get through this. But eventually I learned that I no longer even felt the need to drink, and I don't feel compelled to do that anymore, which I mentioned earlier. And guys, it's fucking awesome. So if I can do that, so can you. All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap this episode up. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed listening, and I also hope that you learned something new and useful. And if you know somebody who could benefit by tuning into the show, dude, just send on over the link. No need to be pushy, but sometimes a nudge in the right direction in a subtle way is sometimes needed. Next week, we're going to cover my experiences with drugs as a youngster, how they affected me back then, my opinion on them, and also my opinion on the Just Say No campaign that the Reagans thought was an oh so great idea. You may or may not be surprised as to what comes out of my mouth, so you don't want to miss it. Also, don't forget to follow Distressed to Joyful _Bailey's Way on Instagram. And you can also check out the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/distressedtojoyful.baileysway, so that you can stay updated with all of the latest information related to the show. So until next time, take it easy, stay grateful, and be joyful. Bye!